Greetings. Frederick Douglass was beaten on a daily basis just to have his spirit broken. He challenged himself to overcome fear, doubt, and persecution. Frederick Douglass was born in February 1818 and he died February 20th, 1895. Frederick Douglass was considered to be an American social reformer, an abolitionist, an orator, a writer, and even a statesman. After escaping slavery in Maryland, he became a national leader of the abolitionist movement in Massachusetts and New York, gaining known for his oratory skills and his incisive anti slavery writings. And I quote from Frederick Douglass: "The white man's happiness cannot be purchased by the black man's misery." End quote. So let's talk about Frederick Douglass, an American hero. Frederick Douglass was described as an escaped slave who really never knew when he was born, although knowing that it was Talbot County, Maryland. His mother was Native American and his father was of African European descent. After being separated from his mother as an infant, he was sent to live with his maternal grandmother. After some time with her, about 6 years old, he was then given to the White House plantation. From there, Douglass was given to Lucretia Auld, whose husband Thomas sent him to live with his brother in Baltimore, Maryland. Douglass credits Hugh's wife for being the first to teach him the alphabet. Frederick Douglass stated this, and I quote: "It is easier to build strong children than it is to repair broken men." End quote. He also not only fought for slavery, but he fought for women's rights and women's suffrage. And he says this, and I quote: "If there is no struggle, there is no progress." End quote. Thomas Auld then took him back and then transferred him to Edward Colby, who was a farmer who was known for his special skills of beating slaves. This began to happen to Frederick Douglass at the age of 16, and on a daily basis, he was beaten just to have his spirit broken. Douglass was more than just an escaped slave, though. Hannah Rose Murray describes Frederick Douglass as an abolitionist and a preacher. But yet he changed his name a few times to avoid detection from his slave master. It went from Bailey, which was his mother's maiden name, to Stanley, then to Johnson, then finally settling on Douglass. Frederick Douglass wrote several books as a slave, which was totally unheard of at the time. His best known work was Narrative of the Life of Frederick Douglass, an American Slave. Many people began to encourage him to leave the country as his slave master was intent on getting his property back. They encouraged him to go to Ireland. And at that time, Ireland was going through its famine. And Douglass wrote of his trip, and I have here an excerpt from his book. And I read: 11 days and a half gone, and I have crossed 3,000 miles of the perilous deep. Instead of the democratic government, I am under a monarchical government. Instead of the bright blue sky of America, I am covered with soft gray fog of the Emerald Isle, Ireland. I breathe, and lo, the slave becomes a man. I gaze around in vain for one who will question my human equality, claim me as a slave, or offer me an insult. I implore a cab, and I am seated beside white people. I reach the hotel, and I enter the same door. I am shown into the same parlor. I dine at the same table, and no one is offended. I find myself regarded and treated at every turn with the kindness and deference paid to white people. When I go to church, I am met by no upturned noses or scornful lip to tell me we don't allow niggers here, says Douglass in 1865. Douglass not only challenged a culture, but he challenged slaves to be empowered by education, to embrace freedom, to embrace empowerment. And he even supported women's rights. And I read for you this in his last autobiography. I was poor, broken-hearted mourner, traveling through doubts and fears, and I finally found my burden lightened and my heart relieved, and I loved all mankind, slaveholders not accepted. Though I abhorred slavery more than ever, I saw the world in a new light, and my great concern was to have everyone converted. My desire to learn increased, and especially that I want a thorough acquaintance with the contents of the Bible. Ladies and gentlemen, this year's recipient of the Grand Canyon University Lifetime Achievement Award, ladies and gentlemen, please stand for Frederick Douglass.